Good morning and welcome to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Today we are working on the actual quilting for our project Bringing Home the Christmas Tree. It's a bit like wrestling an alligator, but we're working on it and it's going pretty well. Join us and I'll tell you what we have done, what we're doing, and we'll show you a little bit of that here today. Well, hi and welcome back. We are working on the quilting for this Bringing Home the Christmas Tree project, and we're doing that on the machine, which is not my preferred method, but I do recognize that in able to get quilting done quickly, that's what I have to do. And today I wanted to bring you in because I have one more car that I need to quilt around, and then we'll be done with the cars. I also have quilted around the perimeter of the project. Here you can see it. It's just a straight line of stitching along about, I would say, a ½ inch from the edge of the border, where the border joins the pieced project. And I'm thinking that I may add another row of stitches in here. I just haven't decided exactly how far over yet. So we'll bring you back in or let you know about that decision later. But right now what I'm doing is I am stitching around the outside of each one of these cars. And my stitch line is somewhere between a 1/16 of an inch and an 1/8 of an inch. It's very close, and I'm just following the outline of the car. I want to make sure that that stitch line is visible, that it doesn't fall down in the ditch between those two pieces of fabric, but I don't want it too far out. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. It could be a 1/16 of an inch like it is here, but it could be more of an 1/8 of an inch like it is here. And I'm just going around that outline. And then I'm also outlining the windows in the car. Now, once the cars are done, I will probably come back and pick another element in this quilt to put the machine quilting in. But for right now, that's what I'm focusing, because once we get those 6 cars quilted around, we will have the structure of the quilt set. And we won't see large shifts to positioning. Now, it was all pin based, so I was able to take one car at a time and do that. And generally speaking, I started in the middle of the quilt top and worked my way out. So the one left to quilt is this red car that sits on the bottom. And that's this one here. So we're going to start working on that. But before we stick it under the machine, I want to talk to you about 2 things. First of all, the batting. For this particular project, I have used a batting that I ordered over Amazon. And it is not the warm and white, or in this case, it's a natural color. It's not the warm and natural that I usually use. I wanted something that I could get my hands on pretty quickly and something that was reasonably priced, maybe a little cheaper than the warm and natural or the warm and white from my local retail store. And I really wasn't in the market for a complete bolt of it either. So I just looked for something that maybe we could try out and see how it did. And I will have a review coming on the channel as soon as I finish this quilt, so I can give you the whole review of how it worked. So this particular quilt batting, now we're not secure here on the edges, and when I first started quilting, I had a large section of this quilt batting exposed, and as we would drag that through the machine and roll it up or crinkle it up to get it into the throat of the machine, you know, that batting touches the other fabrics, and I found that a lot of it came off. You can probably see here there's a lot of fuzz from the batting. That's not coming through the fabric. That's as a result of the batting rubbing off on the fabric. You can really tell it here on this black fabric. We had this once before. This is the black Kona, and we used the black Kona in our bear claw that we did. So we had the same problem there, and that was warm and white that was warm and white that we used on that as well. So it's not necessarily the batting particularly, but the fact that it's exposed. So once we're able to seal up that edge, that should stop. And I've noticed with the bear claw quilt that it has gotten much better. It has not been washed, so I don't know what effect that would have on it. But as far as hanging it on the wall, I'm not seeing any more of that batting show up on that black fabric. So let's get started with the quilting. Now, when you are working on a quilt that you are machine quilting, and again, let me reiterate that I'm not an expert at this. This is something that I don't particularly enjoy doing. I don't love the way it looks on a quilt because I think it's trying to find that mix between a custom hand quilted quilt and a long-armed quilt, and you're trying to incorporate the machinery and the quickness of that, but not having to go all the way to the long arm process. So like I said, it's not one of my favorites, but sometimes it's the mother of necessity, right? Being able to get something finished within a certain period of time, or maybe not even wanting to put as much effort as hand quilting would take into it. Now, for my quilting today, I am using just a standard stitch, and like I said, I'm going about 1/8 of an inch, and I've got a visual place here on my foot, and this is my walking foot, where I'm just keeping the edge of that red car. So the edge of the red or the colored fabric sits in a particular place on my foot. And it is a standard stitch, and it's at it's a standard stitch, and it is at 2.4 for the length. So we're going to get started. Some of these I did and I started without back stitching, and the last 3 or 4 I have started back stitching just to make sure those stitches don't come loose. And it does take quite a bit of attention because it is so easy, and I just did it, to let that stitch wander into the ditch. We don't want that. And I usually sew this pretty slow, so I have lots of control. And this is the last car at the bottom of the quilt. So on one edge of the quilt, we don't have a lot of fabric to deal with. On the other side of the quilt, we have a whole lot. And that's where it begins to get a little problematic. It's really easy to turn at this point. And it's easy to shift your direction because you're not having to wrestle that quilt. Now let me tell you a little secret. I've been sewing this with my walking foot on it, but without the cover to my walking foot. And now that I've put it back on, I did put it back on for the filming, it does not work as well with that cover. So I'm going to see if I can just slip it off. It's not going to come off. So I'm going to take just a minute and take it off. And let me tell you, I don't know exactly why this particular walking foot is, I want to say it's a universal foot. But it has never worked just right with the cover. It always wants to tap on part of the side of the cover when it sews. So I just slipped the plastic part off. And you want to be really careful because I did that with the machine on, just like I'm going to put this back on with the machine on. And that would not be the prescribed safe way to do it. But both of my feet are up on my chair, well away from the foot control. So that should not be a problem. And then I'm just going to make sure my thread is going where I want it to go. And we don't have too much of it down there, because we want a nice even stitch. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and set that back up to start right back where we left off. And we're going to keep going. And like I said, this particular car is easier than most to do because it's at the edge of the quilt. But in just a minute, we're going to get around to the other side and I'll show you the challenges of using your domestic machine. So I'll probably speed up the next few minutes and I'll be back to talk to you about those challenges in just a second. Okay, now we're moving into the section of the quilt where we're sewing and the bulk of the quilt is through here. And that's where we start wrestling this alligator. And I've got a nice large work surface, but it only helps so much. And this machine that I'm working on now does have a bigger throat space than the one I used to use before, so it is easier in that regard, but you are still looking at a lot of quilt material in a little tiny area. So we just take our time and go slow and work through repositioning the quilt as much as we need to. Now, you'll notice I'm using both hands here, one on each side of the needle, and I am not pushing or pulling. I'm allowing my walking foot to do that for this particular technique and this methodology, but I am trying to make it go straight. And I find that if I just put both hands down or slightly here just to have something to hold on to, that works the best. So let's get started going up this side, and I think you'll begin to see what I'm talking about. And it's getting a little difficult there to keep it straight and going in the right direction and the right distance away from this seam. And now we're going to shove all this into that little tiny hole. We're going to start here and we're just going to feed it through. So now we've got this little tiny area here. where we've got all the room, and all this in this little tiny hole. And it needs to be kind of straight so that it will feed through. And I'm pulling or smoothing this down so that I keep it all very smooth and straight and don't get any tip, what do we call it, tucks underneath. So we just want to keep that straight. And every time I turn it, I leave the needle down and just raise the presser foot and then come back down to start. Now you may need to help it a little bit in this area because there's so much fabric that sometimes the machine has a little bit of a problem pressing down enough that it's feeding it through. I think experience with your machine will help with that. We're shoving some more through. We'll sew again. Now there's not room for me to get my hand in on this side, so I'm kind of just reaching through or reaching around to guide that. And more fabric through. And we've got to turn now. So we're shoving more through so we can get that straight at that angle. And more again. That was my fingernail. Like they took it off. Okay, and we're going to pull back this way now. And I'll tell you, when I moved it just then, there's enough pressure on that needle that it actually moved the needle position. So I'm going to put my foot back down and let my needle come up. And I'm going to turn my machine off, leaving everything in place. And turn it back on, and it readjusted where that needle should be, and then I will adjust the fabric. So instead of having to sew back and forth to cut the thread, we just allowed it to readjust itself. That was something that I don't see happen very often. But I think it was just the pure force almost of that fabric moving around that caused the needle to change positions. We should really watch that and be careful not to do that. Okay, and now we're coming back around to where we started. And we're going to sew right up to where we started. And then I'm going to turn it so it's in that same direction and then give a couple of stitches and a couple of back stitches and cut. So now we have sewn around that last car, and we should only have one string from the beginning on the top, and then on the back we have a little I would call it almost a little mini bird's nest, but what we'll do is we'll come back later and see if we can untangle that and then trim it. Okay, so the only thing left to do in quilting the cars on this is the inside of these windows. And that takes a lot of this turning it around. For every little block of window, you've got to turn it all the way around like we just did. So I'm not going to film that today, but we are working through this pretty quickly. Now what I have to decide is, now that I've just done the cars, how am I going to handle the trees and the tree blocks? And I need to give that just a little bit of thought, because I want to do something that can kind of allow it to mesh with the quilting. We don't want to over quilt one section and under quilt another, so we don't necessarily want to echo those, because that would be too much quilting. So we need to find something that would harmonize with it really well, and when I come back next time I'll share that with you. Now I don't know if you noticed or not, but I had told you before that I had sewn around the perimeter of this. I have not sewn in this area where this last car was, just in case I needed to adjust the fabric as we quilted, so I will do that as well. I hope this was helpful for you to get some ideas about sewing and quilting on your machine. It is a daunting thing to think about, because you've put all this work into this quilt top, and now you're going to sew it on your machine, put the quilting on by your machine. And if that's not something you have a lot of experience with, it could give you pause, or you may be even just a little bit afraid to do it. I know that there are some of my quilts that I wouldn't even think about doing it. I put too much work into those tops to put it on a machine and risk messing it up, or not being happy with it and having to rip it all out and possibly damaging the top. I go with a methodology that I'm more familiar with and have better results with. But for this one, this was something that's seasonal, and we're going to use it, and I don't think anyone's going to be analyzing how good the stitches are as much as they are enjoying it and just looking at the patterns of it. So for that purpose, it's a good quilt to machine quilt. And as far as the quilting pattern, we could just go with something just straight lines through it, and we may do something like that. We'll just have to see. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this today and you found something helpful. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next week at the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Bye.